Good afternoon again, everyone. Thank you for joining this session. Black and Brown Youth, their Black Stories Matter. I know it's after lunch, so some of y'all might still be feeling that I don't know if I want to be on here. I've been on here since 9 a.m. It's 1 o'clock. I promise to try my best to keep it lively. The first session, we had them going. So we'll probably try to do the exact same thing. I promise you it's very real. And maybe I should have gave that disclaimer in the last session. This is a very real, raw course, not sugarcoating. We're not high and throwing punches as we celebrate such a monumental moment. There are some real conversations that we need to have as well. So this is the beginning of many. Official introduction. My name is Shirley Plantin. I am the Chief Executive Consultant for U-Turn Youth Consulting. Our mission is U-Turn is really to unmask the intersectional ties between systems and how those systems contribute to the backstories of our youth and families that either lead to the school to prison pipeline and or gun violence in our communities. I am, as I said earlier, I am no stranger to Broward County Public Schools, particularly equity and diversity. I love the work that they do. And I always say I'm a phone call away if I could ever be of any assistance. Today's session is Black and Brown Youth, their backstories matter. And the reason why I chose this particular topic is, again, because of the sheer magnitude of the moment that we're living in. Better yet, the sheer magnitude of the moments that we've been living in the past year. And I think those moments have allowed us sometimes to forget that there are some real issues that we need to address. So that being said, this is a very engaging course. There is a slide or two that I may actually ask you to come off the mic and give me an answer as we engage. This is about 45-minute course, so I promise to have you all out of here 145, 150, 145, 148, the latest, so that you can transition into your last session before the general session. Again, I really hope that if nothing else, this begins some conversations about where we go from here as we celebrate Juneteenth. Thank you for being here, and let's get now. I don't like talking to dead people, so y'all got to be a little bit lively. Some claps, some snaps, whatever you do, but just let me know you're good, and you'll hear me often say, y'all still with me? Because I don't see you on camera. When I do my courses, cameras are actually mandatory because these conversations are hard to have. Just, hey, hi, Catherine, thank you. These conversations are really hard to have with just black screens. So my summer of learning courses are mandatory cameras on. But I understand this one, so we're going to try to vibe, but y'all going to have to at least, thank you, Tad. We're at least going to have y'all, show me some, do like Catherine, do like, Chad. Just let me know we still here. Hi, teacher, how we see? That's what I'm talking about. I'm going to like this session already.
I've already told my administration I need 2 hours of training during pre-planning, whether they like it or not.
Penny, thank you for turning on your mic, your camera. Thank you all. We're going to dive right into it. Again, there's a disclaimer. This may be, it's harsh, it's real, but it's I promise you it'll be worth the conversation. Thank you. For anybody who's had me last year, I did the Beyond Diversity, the Courageous Conversation Beyond Diversity last year. They'll tell you that my courses are raw, they're real, not meant to offend anybody, but in the days and age that we're living, we just don't have any time to beat around the bush as far as it comes to saving our young people and moving our community forward. That being said, let's get into it. I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see my screen? Okay. So the training objective, and sometimes I don't put it in full screen because the ping would sometimes cut the words off, but participants, well, y'all know I always got to get my objectives out so equity don't come look for me. I don't need I don't need Mr. Watkins or Manushka, nobody coming to look for me talking about there was no objective. So the objective is we're going to expose participants to the various factors that are contributing to youth and gun violence and how those elements are creating a state of emergency amongst our youth in the community. I like to start making sure that we're always in the same book. So not only are we reading the same book, but we're in the same chapter and we are on the same page. So what do I mean by backstories? Backstories, many people are more comfortable with the terms root causes, contributing factors, contributing elements, compounding elements, lived experiences or origin. Lived experience is one that it's growing more and more on me. Backstories, I authored a book called The Backstory of a New Reality, Jaw-Dropping Unmasking of Urban Youth Violence, which really is the hard preface to this conversation. And lived experiences have started to take on as a result of everything that we lived through with the George Floyd, with COVID. And I really want us to premise that we all have backstories. Good, bad, or indifference, we have backstories. And those backstories dictate, one, we allow what the backstory, what impact that backstory will have on our lives. Some people allow their backstories to be their last story. Others allow their backstories to be what propels them to their next stories. That being said, we still need to consider the value of backstories. And I always say this, and I'll say it so that everybody kind of got this, kind of gets the same information for this conference. I've been a member of the Florida Gang Investigative Association for well over 18 years. And within that time, I've had students shot 18 times, by God's grace survived. I've had students that, I've stood in the gap with parents who have been looking for their kids for 21 days, who have been victims of human trafficking. And I had to utilize my clients to help identify, because the police was calling off the search and we found a child in a dumpster. Again, by God's grace survived. I've had students who have been servants at family members' homes, because they came here as a result of a natural disaster. And by God's grace right now are rising above and have become the Sphinx to their own stories. So I understand the importance of backstories. And I understand that in order for us to truly, truly celebrate this moment in time with Juneteenth being a federal holiday, we know that it started with, smaller municipalities and counties and cities taking on, and now it's a federal holiday. But we cannot forget where we came from. And I am honored to do this at a time where your keynote speaker was Mayor Piggott, who we are often in the same space doing parallel work, and understanding that historical perspective that he gave about how we got to June 19th, 1865. We cannot forget where we are today, June 18th, 2021, how far we've come, but how much more we have to go. And that is why backstories are important. And as each and every one of you who are a member, who are employees of Dade County Public School in some fashion, way, or form, it is imperative that you understand the backstory of the young people we're dealing with. What we are seeing now is not short of the contributions, the contributing factors of years and decades of backstories, as well as backstories that they live every day, their lived experiences. This picture right here is very real. This is a picture that was put together by Local 10 News here. We have a most recent one, and it's from 10 years. This one was specifically from 2016. We have some from 2018, 2019, but we try to not make it so traumatizing by keeping them so fresh. And in this picture, you'll notice that children and teens. So this was the period where everybody was talking about King Carter. So he was the young man, the 6-year-old that they actually did. I think he was probably the first funeral where the pallbearers actually wore the Ninja Turtle costumes to bury him. Again, trying to make sure that we understood that this was a child. I have the privilege and the honor multiple times to be in the midst of the dad, of King Carter's dad. And I can tell you that that's a pain that you never take away, but to turn that pain into advocacy. And then I have the opportunity of working with so many others who've lost their children. We then have to begin to ask, why are Black and brown parents, mothers and fathers, burying their children so early? In this picture, you're going to see some 3-year-olds, you're going to see some 10-year-olds, and then we can bring it forward. So this is 2016. I'm going to come to the forward in a minute. Anybody who's also taken my course knows that I love numbers. I'm not in love with them. I understand the value of the stats because I also understand that at times we put too much on numbers and that takes away from the story because every number, every research is actually telling a story of someone's life. And then I have the other issue, on the other hand, that with those same numbers, I can tell whatever story it is that I want to tell. But for those people who feel as though they got to get a little bit of numbers in to make sure we know what we're talking about, here's your number slide. There's not another one, so enjoy it and take it all in. In the past 10 years, 2006 to 2016, we are in the process of putting together one for another 10 years. A lot of research is happening. 316 children died from 2006 and 2016. That's an average of 30 young people a year. My earlier session had about 27 to 28 people. That would have been everybody in that classroom plus 2 other students in another classroom. So in this course, in this particular session, there's 15 people. So this would have been 2 classrooms over would have been alienated just by gun violence in 1 year. And I want that to be as clear as we're talking about, because when you look at the left, you've got students who are 2-year-olds, Devin Franklin. I've got a 1-year-old. I have the 6-year-old King Carter. I get Raquel Carr, that's 4-year-old. So the reality is something is happening in our community and we can no longer continue to pretend as though it's not happening. What are some of the reasons? What are some of the deaths or results of domestic arguments? Children are often caught in domestic arguments where gun violence is, and they end up being the victim. Children are caught in crossfires between each other, teens, gangs, whatnot, and then rare instances of children playing accidentally with the trigger. The problem is we utilize the term children and kids interchangeably and youth interchangeably, but we also need to be very mindful that we're talking about up until 22 and 24-year-olds. Most recently, Memorial Day weekend, and I said this earlier, Memorial Day weekend, we had 2 sisters come down here from Atlanta, and the 24-year-old was playing with the gun. She's brandishing the gun, all for Instagram, putting it at the head of her 18-year-old, and then mistakenly the gun goes off. And her 18-year-old sister is not only shot and was pronounced dead this week. This is the reality we're living in. So imagine the pain of this family to lose not just the 18-year-old sister who has died, but you just lost your other daughter to the prison system. There is a conversation that we must have as we celebrate, as we commemorate liberation, as we commemorate freedom from slavery, but we also need to look at, we have moved from one level of slavery and we need to now begin to look at what else is enslaving us, because the reality is there are backstories that are interconnected and there are some things that we don't seem to be able to break away from. And what are some of those things? And those are part of the conversations that we're going to have today. So when a child dies or a teenager is shot, again, I tell you, we utilize those terms interchangeably. Oftentimes, the very first things that we like to talk about for the victims, because as I like to say, everybody's children are great kids. Particularly when they die, everybody's children are good kids. Even when they were the shooter. So we need to be very honest about that and understand that, right? So we're going to take that and move forward. But the problem is there is an image that we have of victims, whether they survived or they're deceased, where we actually take the time to ask some of the difficult questions. Oh my God, I wonder what else was going on with this kid. What was he dealing with at home? How did he end up in that space? You know, why was he out at that time of the night anyway? You know, what could the police have done to do it differently to protect these children? The police is failing them. The school system is failing them. What are we doing? And then the one I love the most, what else could the parents have done? Because the parents are part of the problem. It starts at home. But rarely do we ever ask, what were the backstories, right, of the victims? And the reason I'm saying that is the past 2 weeks have really forced us to look at gun violence from a different perspective. Because usually when we hear mass shootings, we often hear mass shootings from a perspective of non-Blacks. These are white people who are doing mass shootings. But this time, between Miami-Dade and Broward, we were in some of the areas that kind of, this isn't right. You know, you keep that in your communities that are gun slated and the urban communities, because When you go into Miami Lakes, which is predominantly a Hispanic community, something's wrong. When you hear a mass shooting in Kendall, you don't have those things in Kendall, something's wrong. But nobody's asking what's the backstory. The one thing that we do ask is, why are the kids out at this time of the hour? What's going on? But we're not asking the backstory. The reason that this slide is here is because I want you to understand, we will take the time to ask the questions about the victims. But we don't take the same time to ask the story about the shooters. The problem with it is, it's because we had already drawn our own conclusion about the shooter that I really don't give a damn about whether this kid was a good kid, a bad kid, a great kid. We don't care, because the only person that's going to come out on the media and tell you my child was a great child is going to be their parents, right? But the fact remains, we fail to realize that that same shooter, particularly if there were a youth, had the same, we should have been asking the same questions for that kid before they picked up that gun. What else do we know about these kids? What are they dealing with at home? How many teachers came in contact with that kid to notice the red flags, the early warning indicators, the school systems like to call them? How many officers, right, did they come in contact with prior to going the wrong path? What happened to all the U programs? What happened to the cop programs? No one's asking those questions as it relates to the shooters, but we should be asking those questions of all of our kids, right? How many after school and sports programs was he involved in that missed the signs? What else could the parents have done? And the questions continue to go. But the one question that very few people tend to ask is, why is this behavior normal? Why is it acceptable to take someone else's life and not feel as though there is anything behind it? And that question should lead us to, what's the backstory? Because a kid doesn't just wake up 14, 18, 21, whatever. You don't just wake up and shoot someone, take someone's life and don't think twice about it. And I know somebody on here will tell me, but a 21-year-old isn't a kid. A 21-year-old, if we look at Dade County Public Schools, if we look at the foster care system, if you look at funding, we tend to serve children with any type of disability until the age of 21, 22. So then that would say that we consider them as all part of this youth system. What's the backstory? I want to start the conversation by looking at this picture. There are two viewpoints on here. Anybody want to tell me their thoughts? I'm gonna start calling people.
The lion is carrying the cub.
The lion is carrying the cub. That's the positive viewpoint. That's what you see. So we know it's a cub. Marcella, you had your mic on.
I was going to say that too, but also the negative point would be like, maybe the lion is hurting the cub because he's grabbing the cub by the neck.
So oftentimes, when we don't have the full picture, we draw our own conclusions. Oftentimes, a kid comes into the classroom, you've tried reaching out to the parents forever and a day, and there is no answer. We draw our own conclusion that this parent may not care. When in reality, the phone number may have changed, the parent may have become homeless, the parent may have job insecurity. There's a myriad of issues that may happen that we don't often take into account because we are looking at things from our own perspective. We're looking at it from our viewpoint. And here's one of my favorite words that a lot of people are uncomfortable with. We're looking at things from our privilege. Privilege from the perspective that because I would make the call for my child, because I would answer the call, how dare this parent not do the same, right? Those are all from our viewpoints, our position of privilege, but more importantly, based on our backstories. Because how we react is based on what we've been exposed to. It's based on our lived experience, which will include your socioeconomic status, your parental status, your marital status, and the list goes on, right? Anybody who took a course with me last year knows that there are two characteristics of diversity. There's that checkoff list, and then you have that real, your secondary characteristics, which are the ones that you pick up and you drop off. Those are the ones that really make us who we are. So as we serve children and their families, as we serve youth, we need to always ask ourselves, when I'm providing a service, from where is my answer coming from? And then you're asking, what does all of this have to do with Black and brown youth and their backstories matter? Because even today, as we're celebrating Juneteenth around this concept of equity and diversity, Understand that there are people that still don't believe that this holiday should even exist as a federal holiday. Understand that there are people who still, the same folks who voted to make this a federal holiday, still don't think that we should have the full story told of Black Americans in this country. Understand that the same people who have decided to make this a holiday feel that it is strictly a symbolic approach, but not necessarily something that validates the existence of an entire race. Your viewpoint matters based on your privilege. Your viewpoint matters based on your lived experience. That is why their backstories matter. Y'all still with me? Give me something.
We're still with you.
Thank you. So now let's talk about some of these backstories, right? Because a lot of times the kid that's sitting in front of you, comes to class or comes to counseling or comes to whatever capacity, they come to your office, they're sitting in front of you with baggages more than you'll ever understand. Oftentimes there are young people that have lived an entire life that many of our lives put together, we will never have lived. And we need to own up to it. So we're going to touch a couple of these real quick as I'm being mindful of time. So the picture on the corner left at the top is an image we've become almost desensitized to. An image of Black and brown young men being arrested, and everybody's like, oh, here we go again, another group of Black and brown kids, that's arrested. What's the big deal? The drugs. We've gotten to a point where we're like, what's the big deal? All these kids are taking drugs. But what we fail to realize is our children are living in a generation of challenges. These drugs are not just drugs. So the pictures on here are actually from a drug party. And the reality is, in order for you to get into this drug party, you got to bring all your mama and your daddy's drugs in the medicine cabinet to participate. And then we wonder why our kids can't concentrate. And then they're chasing it with alcohol. And you're wondering what is happening to our children. And then the third picture is the concept of our children for sale. When I first started doing this, it was a big deal because they call Miami sexy. So between Port Everglades and Port of Miami, we get more cruise ships, we get more conventions, we get more conferences, and oftentimes there are countries that are already placed labels on our children that they wanted to buy, right, on the Black market. But the reality, as time has changed, we used to have Backpage. Now it's not Backpage anymore. Now it's Reddit. And you have all this other stuff that's happening. And we're sitting here trying to figure out, where have we gone wrong? One of the ways we've gone wrong is because I have 7-year-old girls being sold by their parents on these sites. And the reality is, when money becomes what grabs us, then we have a problem. And it's not just Black, it's not just Hispanics, it's not just Asians. It is a plethora. Everyone's doing it because the value of our children. We have stopped valuing the importance of our children. So then we'll go to the corner left, right? These images of the guns and the drugs and the weed and the marijuana, and the list goes on. We're smoking dirty, the K2, K7, the Kush. It's almost as if, oh, well, what's the big deal? We went through it in the days of hippies. We're not living in the same times. And the reality is, when our children are on drugs and our children are drinking and our children are exposed to the things that they're exposed to, we have to be able to begin to ask, how do these backstories impact the young men and women that stand in front of us? And then this young lady in the middle picture, I'll tell you a quick story. I got called in by a state attorney who says to me, we want you to come speak to a group of girls who have just come out of the life. And I think I told this story when I was doing equity and diversity last year. I went in with a perception already that these were going to be predominantly Caucasian, Hispanic young women, because that is often the image that we're seeing. And I walked into a room of 26 young women who look exactly like me. And I had to quickly readjust myself and check myself, because I was coming in from my position of, remember the picture we just saw? My point of view, my perception, my privilege. The kids that, when you see a kid that's branded with a tattoo of a barcode, that is an ownership. The kid that's branded with a tattoo on their eyebrow, that's an ownership of someone. And oftentimes it's going by and we don't even see it because we're not taking time to see our kids for who they really are, but instead a student and a number. And then lastly, this image at the corner right has just become so normalizing to us. of seeing Black and brown men sitting in prison with these jumper suits on, and then we're asking ourselves, oftentimes the comment is, well, they did whatever they did, they need to be there. But do we realize through the loins of these same Black and brown men, there's an entire generation that has failed? We need to begin to understand that the transfer of culture, the transfer of knowledge, the transfer of what it is that we're celebrating today and tomorrow through Juneteenth doesn't happen if these young people don't know it. It's pointless if we're only celebrating it today and then tomorrow we're gone, because guess what? We've taken it with us. So then let's talk about some of these quick realities, right? So the urgency, our kids, I have kids that say to me all the time, man, SP, they call me SP on the streets. We're not living out here. We're just trying to survive. So as a teacher who walks up, or an educator who walks up, and your first question is, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? You've already detached yourself from these children's reality, because in their mind, they're just trying to make it till tomorrow. Many of them don't even intend to be here for 17 and 18 because they tell you, nobody else in my hood did it, so what makes me so special? If we don't understand that, we fail. And the mere fact that that's their perception, we have failed the ancestors that have allowed for Juneteenth to happen. Because when we look at the images of those people, the slaves that were packed in the ships and how they made it out to get onto the crops, and from the crops to move on to Jim Crow and to so forth and so, we don't know if our children are as resilient because we aren't pouring anything. That image of the community isn't there. That village concept isn't there. Which then brings us, we're already talking about backstory, so let's move on. But then we also have to look at these same systems, how have they hurt the family, right? Because when you take a community and you say that, so we have to separate our men from our women in slavery, but then we have systems right now that's doing the exact same thing. There are systems in our country that a man can't be in a house in order for a mother to get a voucher to stay in the house. So what are we doing? We're perpetuating the exact same thing that created the problem. And now, because mom has to work 2 and 3 jobs, these same systems don't want to pay us a living wage, right? So now that mom has to work 2 and 3 jobs, nobody's in the house to take care of the child feels like, I got to go out here and make it happen. I got to go make my own money. And when I make the own money, I'm going to break mom off a little bit. Mom's not going to ask any questions because the iPhone and the cars and the nails and the hairdos are coming in. But because you're breaking me off, I'm not going to ask any questions. So what do we think happens? There's a role reversal because the kids are making more money than the parents in the household. There's a systemic issues that we need to address. The living on the edge, why are our kids living on the edge? What options have we given them aside from living on the edge? Because at the end of the day, if the streets are what they're calling the family, we've already failed them. Irreality between Grand Theft Auto and Fortnite, how the hell do we expect for kids to know the difference? Because we've made these games so natural, they're diverse. Indeed, they're diverse. Indeed, they have the dialects. They look like they look like reality. But our kids in their frontal lobes can't process that. What I did, I shot someone on a game that I've been playing for 8 hours, and now I can pick up a gun and shoot someone in the streets, and you expect me to know the difference that this person isn't going to pop up? Yeah, that is a backstory, because not all of our kids cannot make that differentiation. And then we're going to come into the public health issue. I think if anything, COVID, HIV, malaria, it all taught us that you do not address an epidemic or a pandemic from the end. You address it from its origin. You address it from its epidemiology. There's a reason right now that there is all this push in Congress to figure out where it was that COVID started. Was it in a lab? Did it go from a bat to somebody for real? Was it created? There's a reason these conversations are happening beyond it just being political. It's because in order for us to cure it and prevent it from happening again, we need to understand its origin. So now I dare to ask you this question. Why is it that so many young Black and brown kids are dying across the country? Chicago, Baltimore, New York, California, Miami, they're dying and no one is trying to address the epidemiology of what's leading to the gun violence. That's a question you guys should be asking. And then we have to consider all the many disabilities. When a system creates the plethora or the platform for us to say, you know what, I need a teacher to declare my child disabled so I can make $647 in order for me to live. And I'm going to force you to give me that diagnosis. And if you don't give me the diagnosis, I'm going to go to a private doctor that's going to give me the diagnosis, because guess what? That diagnosis guarantees me $647. And we don't think about what that's going to do to that child moving down. We have failed our children. We have failed the transfer of knowledge, the transfer of culture, the pain, the wisdom, and everything that has been gained as we celebrate Juneteenth. Are we sure that our kids even understand what Juneteenth stands for? Not the day, but the history and what it carries. And then we have to realize that there's the privilege aspect, that people often feel that only, poor Black and brown communities are the ones with at-risk youth. Let's not be fooled. Don't fool us. Don't fool yourselves either, that wealthy kids do it too. Because a lot of times the same things that these kids in quote unquote poor Black and brown communities are craving, wealthy kids are craving them too. And then they intersect by social media, and we wonder, how did that happen to my child? Because they're living in a world that we're not a part of. Y'all still with me? So I wanted, before we continue, to have this real quick conversation. Some of y'all just need to come back to reality. We walk around here downgrading people because of their struggles. Stop acting like you've never had to call and get a bill extended. Stop acting like you never had to eat what you had because you couldn't afford what you really wanted. Stop acting like you never had to catch a bus or catch a ride because you never had a car. Stop acting like you never had anyone in your family or close to you do drugs. Stop judging people in their struggles, because remember, the Lord sits high and he looks low. Be mindful, because the struggles of someone is going through today can turn and be yours tomorrow. And I think the more we can turn around and understand that no one is immune from struggles. No one is immune from hard times. No one is immune from backstories. And one of the things that people love to say is, let's talk about the home, because that's where it began. I'll be the first one to tell parents. I tell them that in court when I stand with them. I tell them that when they call me. I didn't tell you to have these kids. But now that they're here, they become all of our responsibility to ensure that they succeed. So when you ask a child or a parent, well, what's going on at home? First of all, home is a fully loaded word, because a home is not a house. A house is not a home, right? And what is home? What I have often found in a lot of the work that I do, oftentimes the very first time that a child is victimized, it's happening in the home. The very first time that a gun is put in a child's hand sometimes is coming from somebody in the household that's saying, show me what you made of, man up. Is home safe? We don't know that. What activities are going on in the home? We actually wrote an article called Home is Not Necessarily Always the Safest Place, especially if there's molestation, especially if there's drugs, especially if there's disability issues, if there are curiosity issues as far as sexuality is concerned. Our children are dealing with issues that oftentimes we just assume they have been built to address. Some of the things that kids have said to me, my parents aren't there. There isn't a home. And then we need to look at the whole concept of home, right? Our understanding of what used to make up a family, the family makeup is different. So if the family makeup is different, then that would mean that we need to address the family differently. Two-parent household, single-parent household, whatever it is, you got an aunt and an uncle, you got an older brother taking care of a younger sister, then how is it that we expect to get different results if we're doing the exact same things, but yet the fundamental issue has changed on us and we haven't changed to match it? What we understood as families coming out of Juneteenth and what we understand as families now, they may have the same words, but they don't look exactly the same. So as providers, we cannot attempt to continue to provide services as we did 10 years ago to something that has changed on us. And lastly, when the kid doesn't feel safe, the streets become their homes, because somebody else is going to give your child a safe haven if you don't make that home safe. One of the things that has always stayed with me is when young people say to me, man, Miss Shirley, I don't even know if they love me. I ain't never hear nobody say I love you. We don't understand the value that those three words have and how much those three words, yes, Catherine, and how much those three words can change the trajectory of a child's life. okay? I have had young people say to me, I had the gun in my hand, and the only reason I didn't shoot because I could hear my mama saying, I love you, baby. And when that kid said that to me, I was forever done. And I truly then understood the value of I love you. Then I had another kid say to me, I shot up a house because I knew nobody ain't love me and I wanted them to feel my pain. We don't understand that if we're not passing down love, if we're not passing down positivity, we're not talking about education, then all of this is for naught. Our children are not living. They're existing and they're trying to survive. I'm coming, Catherine. Let me just get through it so I can give you guys some time. I'm coming. I'm coming. I promise. Why should this matter to you? Many of you are educators on here. All of you should be educators in some form or fashion, right? You are the lifeline of any generation because you pour into these kids the one thing that no system on this planet can take away from them. That there isn't a thing in hell that can take away what has been poured academically into a child's brain. You can take a home, you can take a car, you can take anything materialistic, but what's in my mind belongs to me. And the mere fact that I understand that, it makes an entire generation powerful. But until we can pass that on, we're failing them. Everything else that's on here, social service providers, funders, law enforcement, we saw how all of these things failed our children in the past year, failed our community, Black and brown communities in the past year. But the one thing that remains steadfast true is the fact that what I learned, I don't owe that to anybody but to myself. And what I give back is what I've been given. So educators cannot just be in the school system. Educators have to start at home. Educators have to start in the community. And what do I mean by that is because oftentimes people say to me, so SP, what's the solution? There isn't one solution. It's a multi-approach solution. It's the after-school program. It's the sports. It's the arts. I never understood why we don't value coaches as much as we value teachers because they're on the courts, they're on the fields doing the work that a lot of students will buy from them that they won't buy from an educator sitting in a classroom. The parental involvement can only go so far if they're walking it alone. And then I want us to remember that there is indeed a mutual accountability to the success of these children. Children are a product of their environment. And if we are not all looking at it as a mutual accountability, that Catherine's child is as important as Marcella's child, is as important as Deetra's child, is as important as Eddie's child, regardless of color, race, none of that matters. Because at the end of the day, Juneteenth would have meant nothing to this country and to the world if, in fact, we do not value the backstories of the slaves. Because on the back of the slaves lies an entire generation of people. So therefore, if anybody ever says backstories don't matter, they do. Because until we begin to acknowledge, that is what Juneteenth is. It is the acknowledgement that this happened. It is the acknowledgement that this country and parts of this country were built on the back of these people, and yet still, there are systems that continue to hinder them from moving. So how far we've come with a Black president. There are people that still believe they don't owe us nothing else because y'all already had a Black president. What more do you want? How can we possibly believe that one person can cure the ills of generations? And I said something earlier that I want us to be very mindful of as I wrap up. Our privilege. The highest form of knowledge is empathy, for it requires us to suspend our egos and live in another's world. Our egos actually build our privilege. So a lot of times, instead of coming to the table with your perception, instead of coming to the table of what you think you know best about another community, about another culture, it is more than the language, the food, the music. It's more than that. It's so much more than that. Because aside from all of those, the underlying history, the underlying pain, the underlying disappointments, and the underlying and sometimes overt systemic racism stop certain communities from moving forward. If we ever thought that we were in this by ourselves and that there wasn't an ecosystem, look at what happened. Look at what has happened with the Asian community. Look at what has happened with the Native American community. Look at what's happened. It does not stop. The only reason what we saw during the George Floyd protests mattered, and the only reason we have gotten the results that we had, not that we've reached the mountaintop, but at least you're validating lives, is because collectively we all said enough is enough. Collectively. I marched 18 to 19 of those protests here in Miami. And I can tell you the diversity of the people screaming enough is what made the difference here. So we can value our diversity. We can look at equity and we can say, oh, these are just term words. And then we can add backstories to it and say, we can't continue to ask children to meet us where we are. They're not built for it. If we want to see change, we need to meet children and people where they are. Because then and only then will we truly understand what Juneteenth was about. Juneteenth was about love. It was about trust. It was about belonging in a country that they'd given so much for, that they didn't even ask to come here. But more importantly, we can't do any of that until we begin to have conversations. Conversations like this, conversations that allows us to pass down the proper history, not the one they want to teach us, but the one that actually happened. Conversations that pass down the traditions, the real culture, not through our lens, but through the lens of Blackness. Because my lens and your lens may not be the same, and it's not intentional, but it's because we've walked different walks. My grandmother, my great-grandmother has a different backstory than your great-grandmother will have. And how that information has been transcended down to you is going to be very different. So I ask of you, how do we solve that problem? How do we begin to host these conversations to demand change? Stop sympathizing with people and begin to empathize with people. Begin to put your ego aside. Begin to put your lived experience aside and ask the proper questions. What else do I need to know? Nothing bothered me more than hearing people say, although I give them a lot of credit, I didn't understand the Oklahoma. I didn't understand Tulsa until recently. That means there's so much more that we don't know. And we owe ourselves, we owe our children, Black, white, and indifferent, the opportunity to get it right, because only then do we truly, truly celebrate the purpose of Juneteenth. So quite a bit of people always ask me, how do we connect with you? You can follow us. You can find us on our website. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook, U-Turn Youth Consulting. You can follow me personally, Instagram and Facebook at Dr. Shirley Plantin. I have about 2 minutes before I let you guys go. Catherine, you first, because I promised you I was coming back. What's up?
Oh my God, I love you. And I messaged you. We so need to talk. We so need to talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I as a white woman, thank you for the whole courageous conversations lessons that I've received. As a white woman doing this equity work, it has completely changed my life, even in having raised a Black son. You want to transform your classroom? You want to change the entire dynamics of your classroom? My kids never leave me, and it's my kids because they're my babies. My kids never leave me without me saying, I love you. Because of what you said, Dr. Plantin. I might be the only person who says it to them that day. And they need to know someone loves them. And my toughest, roughest kids, and I work at Addicts Middle School, I got some rough, tough kids. First couple of weeks, they don't say it back. But when your roughest kid starts saying, I love you too, and they start to melt and they do anything, it completely changes your classroom. Every time I have to discipline a kid, no matter how much I make my room chill, it always happens. And I say to them after I discipline them, I love you, because they need to know there is no strings attached to that love. Just because you did something that was improper doesn't mean it changes the love I have for you. Because if you grew up in a household like I did, I may not look like you, but there was a lot of craziness in my household. My backstory, having a Vietnam veteran for a dad, that had its own level of craziness growing up in. Okay, so I tell them all the time, just because I don't look like you doesn't mean we haven't had similar experiences. respect me from where I come from. I'll respect you from where you come from. And then we have a better understanding of each other.
Well said.
I just, it makes my hand shake because.
Very well said. I'm hoping you'll join my class this year. I'm teaching cultural competence for academic achievement starting Tuesday. There's a point that Eddie made on the chat that I really want to address. I want you guys to understand. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you. You warm my heart. At least somebody's getting it. The social media, and I'm going to transfer over because we got to go because y'all got another session in about 5 minutes. Social media, I need you to understand that our children live for the lit moment. Our children only care, their entire life is validated by the likes and the shares. So if we don't understand that, we have started to fail them as well. And one of the last things I will close with, the reason that the Jewish community does so well, and we all know Holocaust, we remember Holocaust, and is because they make it their business to remind us that it happened so it never happens again. That is what Juneteenth should be about every time we talk about it, so that it never happens again. I gotta let you guys go. I love you. You guys can connect with me on UVA. I am on UVA. If you haven't applied, please, please, please check us out on Cultural Competence for Academic Achievement starting Tuesday. I think it's still open. I'm not sure. But definitely, it's been great having you. Thank you for the compliments. Eddie, thanks for coming on. Kristen, thank you for the compliment and the kind words. Chad, thank you so much. Catherine, y'all have a good one. Let's connect as soon as possible. Thank you all for coming.